Hello, it's a great pleasure to be in dialogue with Dr. Sharom Moalem. Thank you for accepting the invitation to be together for elefantFest for a presentation in dialogue about your amazing book, The Better Half: An Argument for the Genetic Superior of Women. Let me ask you this, Dr. Sharom Moalem.
Yes.
The genetic superiority of women is like a fact for you. Why? Why it is a fact, not an interpretation?
It's a great question that you ask. So, I mean, starting about 10 years ago when I finished my medical training and my scientific training, I was like most of my colleagues. I believed that men were not only physically stronger, but they were biologically stronger as well. And I was taught that the reason that men don't live as long really has to do with behavior. They don't go to the doctor as often, they don't eat as well. And it took 10 years of experience to change my mind and then to discover this genetic explanation to turn something from a question or a hypothesis to much more of a fact. And that was wherever you look around the world, whatever species, if it's a bird, if it's a mammal, if it's a human, the sex that gets 2 X's will live longer and will be genetically actually advantaged. And the biggest shock for me was that even when you look at other species, when it's not the female sex, in humans, it's the female sex that has XX, males typically have XY. In birds, so avian species, what you see is you see the reverse. Male birds have the equivalent of XX called ZZ, and they live longer than the female. So this isn't the genetic superiority of the female sex, it's the genetic superiority of female humans, of women.
Mm-hmm. If women are genetically superior, it turns out that men are genetically inferior, right? Or it's like a little provocation.
Yes, I'd rather think of it that men are actually genetically and somewhat biologically fragile. Mm-hmm. So what do I mean by fragility? I mean that you see whatever illness it is, if it's cancer, if it's infections, men not only develop more cancer, even after a cancer diagnosis, they don't do as well clinically. So they'll die at a greater number with treatments compared to women. They have a fragility. The part that's very difficult to understand is, well, if men are physically stronger, so you and I may have more upper body strength, we may be able to run faster, throw further than the average woman. But when it comes to dealing with the challenges of life, so infections, typically cancer, famines, women always outlast men. And so I really see it as that males are more biologically fragile. And you wouldn't really think of it in this way, because you would think if you have physical strength, shouldn't you be able to fight cancer better? And it really seems that what the biology that gives men physical strength, more testosterone and having the Y chromosome, is actually what predisposes men then to develop cancer and then not do as well even if they're treated.
Could you write, or could we write a book as interesting as your book about the genetic inferiority of men?
Yes, but I would say the genetic fragility. Fragility. And the reason why, I mean, one of the things that drove me to write this book is to say, if women have an advantage when it comes to surviving COVID, which we know now, every country around the world, twice as many men die at every single age. It's not just older men. And more men, of course, get cancer. What can we learn from women's biology? How can we study women's biology to help men and to help them overcome and deal with this physical fragility?
Why is this genetic superiority of women a good or a very good news for men?
Exactly for this reason. And if we can accept, a lot of men have an issue when they hear this. They say, I'm not saying that men are not as good as women. I'm saying that men are just much more fragile. If you can accept that and start to understand that, then you'll come very quickly to the conclusion that men actually need more medical care. Boys need more help when it comes to learning disabilities. We know autism spectrum disorder, 4 boys for every girl. Every type of intellectual disability is almost twice as many boys get it as girls do. What can we learn from female biology? What can we, by studying women, they have the biological key and the biological, I think, answers to help men. In the same way that if we study men, we can then apply it to certain diseases that women are more susceptible to.
Mm-hmm. Is this superiority in any way a bad news for men?
No, I think for men, actually, it's good news right across the board because, I mean, I'll give you one example. So again, COVID, we're trying to understand why are so many more men dying? First, they said it's because men smoke more, which it doesn't seem to be true. Then we were told men don't wash their hands as often. Again, we now know that even when you look at healthcare workers, doctors and nurses, more females get COVID in those such situations, but more men are dying. So it's not hand washing, it's really biology. So for men, the good news is that the more that we could take, and if we start accepting the fact that women might have the answers for us, the longer that actually men may be able to live.
It's a fact that the genetic superiority of women has medical implication. Let's resume, let's emphasize what are the most important, this medical implication, consequences.
Yes. So we should actually start with one of the most, with actually a negative consequence. So, which seems to almost discount what I'm saying, which is autoimmunity. So autoimmune conditions, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, lupus, they're all much, much more common in women. So when you look at multiple sclerosis, it's 4 women for every man who gets this condition. And on the surface, this would seem an argument against what I'm saying about genetic superiority, but it actually comes from the fact that women's immune system is very aggressive. It's very good at finding cancers that may be hiding in their bodies. The downside to that is that they're going to be more likely to attack themselves. So remember when we first started speaking, you were asking me, how can men benefit? Well, women can benefit as well if we can understand why is it that men's immune cells are very lazy. They don't attack themselves. They don't give themselves an autoimmune disease as easily as women do. So if we study autoimmunity in men, we might then find out new avenues and new pathways of research then to help women. But fundamentally, when we look at every biological problem of survival, it doesn't matter what it is. When we look for longevity, women do almost everything better than men. And I'll give you another simple example that we were just now really understanding is color vision. We have the 2 genes that we use to see color vision that are on the X chromosome. So men only have one X, right? We have X and Y, you and I. If something is wrong with our X chromosome that has the genes for color vision, we go from seeing the world in color. So we're able to discern 1 million colors. That goes down to 30,000 colors. So we're colorblind. Now, 10% of European men are colorblind, but only 0.1% of women are colorblind. That's because they have another X. So if one X is broken for color vision, they have another X that they can use. That's for over 20 or 30 years, 40 years. That's how we understood women's advantage. But what did we discover now? That every single woman is using both X chromosomes in their eyes. And what does that mean for women? That they can see not 1 million colors, but they can see 100 million colors. And we think that at least a quarter of women could do this, maybe even more. So in fact, men and women are not even looking at the world in the same way. We don't even see the same color spectrum. So as we begin to study the differences between men and women, we start to understand maybe we're not only are we not seeing the world in the same way, maybe our bodies aren't even interacting in the same way. And slowly we start seeing that women have all these powers. And then the big question is, why? Why wouldn't it be great for men to have this as well? And the reason is in biology, it's always a compromise. So one sex will get XX, will get an extra X, one gets XY. So why is it that women get it and men don't? It's that women typically care much more for children than men do. And so in every society we look, and throughout history, women always took care of their children more than men. And the survival of children is biologically completely dependent on the mother for the beginning of life, because the mother, in most situations throughout history, provided milk. So if an infection arose or a famine arose and the child's mother dies, then that child will likely not survive. And even further, what we're discovering is women's role as grandparents, as grandmothers. If a child in Africa, for example, where a lot of this work has been done, has a grandmother that's alive, that child has a much higher chance of making it into adulthood than if she has a grandfather. So grandmothers and the ability for women to live much longer and through menopause to stop producing children, so then they care for grandchildren, is really a way in which our species has survived. And that's why women have been gifted with this extra genetic power.
On the other hand, does women genetic superiority have cultural implication, cultural consequences? Could we say something like this?
Yes. I think it has immense implications. Well, from a societal perspective, for example, a lot of countries put much more money into breast cancer research than they do into prostate cancer. But now, for example, in the United Kingdom, where now we have data, more men get prostate cancer than women, but we spend twice as much on on breast cancer than we do on men for prostate cancer. And so, I'm not saying that we have to equalize everything, but really what medicine in a way has really failed men, because of all these opportunities where we should have been really focusing on why men are much more fragile. Some of the societal and cultural implications, of course, has to do with what I was saying previously regarding color vision. The assumption is that men and women are the same. But what I'm saying is, on a genetic level, our organs have a sex. So our brain has a sex. So our brains, a man and a woman's brains from a genetics perspective, does not function in the same way. And so we each have different skills. So what's very important is to always have equality, like the potential for equal opportunity. But we may not always have situations of equality of outcome, and we can blame that on sexism when it just might have a biological or a genetic explanation.
Provocative questions also.
Yeah.
Question: does women genetical superiority have ideological implication? If we can assume that between men and women are genetical differences, could we say that could we put in the ideologies these differences? Is this correct?
I think it depends how we apply this knowledge. So if our understanding is that, I'll give you one example. Let's talk about space exploration. So typically we talk about occupation. So we thought of space exploration as the domain of men because men are physically stronger. And this still holds now, this controversy. But what we're discovering is that possibly exposure to radiation in space, to the environment of space, is much worse for men. Meaning, actually, maybe all the astronauts who are going to be attempting the trip to Mars should actually be women and not men. And this is based on the biological differences. And that's shocking because we say, but aren't men stronger? Yes, they are. If it's physical strength, but because we have machines today to do a lot of the physical work that we didn't have in the past, and if we look at the importance of the environment of space being very harsh, then what we end up having possibly to make this decision based upon sex, because most likely the people who will make it to Mars and back will be women, because they can deal with the harsh environment that promotes cancer, that promotes the decay and breakdown of the body much more than it does for men. Women do much more better in those environments, the harshest environments.
Is this facts for you, the genetic superiority of women, something easy, something intuitive or it is especially a reversal of a common classical perspective?
Yeah, I think, like I said, when we first began speaking, it was not intuitive. It took 10 years of experience of seeing the opposite of what I was continuously taught, which was in every situation, boys and men were not doing as well as women. And it was a lot easier to discount these differences when you think of adults, because men and women do not behave the same way, right? More men commit suicide, more men drink and smoke, more men take risks. All those things lead to a poor health outcome. So we could say, we could attribute the biological differences, the survival advantage that women have, to behavior. For me, really what it was taking care of very young babies who are not drinking, smoking, driving, taking risks, and saying, why is it that when two children are born, everything being equal very early and sick, why is it that more often than not, the boys are dying and the girls are not? And everywhere we look around the world, more girls make it to their first birthday than boys. So once you understand that, and you understand the genetic reason for it that I gave in my book, then it becomes obvious. You start looking around, at your own personal experiences in your own life and saying, well, now I understand why when my husband gets sick, he gets sick for much longer. It's not just COVID, it's other conditions as well. And I think that changes our understanding a little bit about the basic differences between the sexes.
Mm-hmm. Who are the two chromosomes that give a woman a solid advantage in terms of survival? How can you characterize them in a synthetical way?
Yeah. So we have, if you think of it this way, we have our entire blueprint, our DNA fits into 23 volumes. If you think of them as like encyclopedias. And one of those volumes, so only one out of the 23 is the sex chromosomes. It's either X or Y. And those 23, we have two pairs. So in total, we have 46 encyclopedias. So a man has XY, a woman has XX. Now, what's the big deal about getting another X? I think that's really at the heart of your question. The X especially has instructions. If you think the volume, the encyclopedic volume has instructions on how to build and maintain a brain and how to construct and defend the body through the immune system. So these two areas are crucial to our survival. If your brain is not functional, it's going to be very hard for you to get through life. And if you don't have an immune system, you're not going to live that long, not much longer. And so what women have, because they have these two volumes, women have 1,000 extra genes to solve life's problems. And that is an immense advantage. And it means that if for every man that doesn't have that extra genetic inheritance, if something is wrong with any of these genes, they're going to have a deficiency. The example was what I gave earlier. Men are going to be colorblind. Women are going to have color vision. But what we're discovering, it's not just that women have color vision. Women have a superpower. They can see 100 million colors, and men can only see one at best. So you and I, no matter what we inherit, we will never be able to see the amount of colors, the potential that a woman can. And that likely works for all of those 1,000 genes that are inherited, that women can use that extra genetic information to deal with life's problems and to make it far out into the life course. And this helps us to understand that when we look at, when you reach the age of 100, 80% of the people who are alive are women. When you reach the age of 110, 95% of the people who are left are women. So life is a very long, difficult, and challenging and very sad, sometimes happy race. So the fact that women are the only ones that are making it to the far end is really explained by the fact that they have this extra genetic inheritance.
Are there risks to women's genetic superiority? Are there costs?
Yes. Some of which I mentioned earlier. The major cost is if you look at almost all women around the world, they are going to be at much higher risk for autoimmunity. And it's not a small cost. It's a large cost. many of these autoimmune conditions don't shorten your life. They're not fatal, but they have a high morbidity, meaning like there's a big cost to your physical health. And again, it's multiple sclerosis, four women for every one man. Lupus, it's almost 10 women for every one man. Autoimmune thyroiditis, it's 20 times as common in women. So we're not talking about small numbers. And yet, when you compare a man and a woman who both get an autoimmune condition, the man does not do as well as the woman. So it still goes to show you that all things being considered and equal, men still have a much harder time dealing with autoimmunity or cancer or survival in general.
Does the pandemic kill more men than women, or it is not correct to make such a statement?
It's very much correct for COVID-19. We know everywhere around the world that we have very solid data for. 2 men or more die for every woman. And this is not just older men. So at every age group that we look at, we see the same pattern. Twice as many men as women. And it is not connected to behavior. We now know that it's not what men are doing. It's not because men are not wearing masks or washing their hands or taking more risks or not listening to their doctors or public health instructions. It's because men are biologically more fragile. And I think COVID-19 makes that so clear. And it was the prediction that I made because I wrote the book before the pandemic. And I said the next time likely a pandemic will strike, what we will see beyond a doubt is that we will see women outliving and surviving the pandemic compared to men.
Mm-hmm. Is equality between women and men a myth, or is a necessity and goal in itself?
I think it's how we define equality. If we talk about equality of opportunity in society, I think that that's a very lofty goal that benefits both sexes. But there is no way from a biological perspective to say that men and women are equal. Of course, men and women are much more similar to one another genetically, but you and I may have more in common with a male chimpanzee from a genetics perspective. That's how fundamental the difference is. Women don't have a Y chromosome. It doesn't. Every organ and every cell in the body has a sex. So what the problem is that we were comparing an orange or say a pear and saying the pear is the woman, the orange is an apple, and they are the same. They are not the same. They're both fruits. And so that's the same when you apply that and you try to understand, we can't expect women to have the physical strength of men, right? And so, there's many occupations that require more physical abilities than other occupations. And so you're going to see men overrepresented in those situations. And I think understanding that we are similar, but we are biologically fundamentally different will also help us evolve as a society.
Mm-hmm. So in this condition, will the future belong to women, or will the future belong to women and men? We've emphasized to the conjunction and.
Yes. I think my hope is, and this is really my hope for writing the book, if we want to have a future, we need both women and men. And to have the most successful future possible for humanity is to start appreciating these differences. It's for men to accept that they might be biologically fragile, and for us to be able really to freely study both sexes, and I think to help one another. That should be the goal that will get us to the best future possible.
How should the theory you propose not be understood?
It shouldn't be understood as I think a moral concept of that women are better than men. When I say that women are superior, it is very much in the idea of genetics and survival. In the same way, if I would say that men are physically superior to women, I don't think anyone would challenge that, because that's our day-to-day experience. Our day-to-day experience is men have these physical abilities. And so I wouldn't want men or women to think that I'm saying that one sex is better than the other. It's just my hope is that we begin to appreciate these fundamental biological differences so that we could essentially help both sexes.
Mm-hmm. And the last one question, like a joke, let's say.
Yeah.
A woman is never inferior to a man, but neither superior nor much less equal. Do you agree with this, Mr. Moalem?
I appreciate the joke, but I think it depends how how we interpret superiority or inferiority. To me, it's very much if we're talking about biology, as we were just talking about. I think it's clear that women have this advantage. But I think what's important is to understand society when we're looking at having an equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. And I think not expecting everything, to work out for an equal outcome on the basis of to understand that men and women physically and genetically are different.
Thank you again so much, Dr. Sharom Moalem, for this very well conversation. Between us, your amazing book, The Better Half, an argument for the genetic superiority of women. Thank you so much for this great honor, Dr. Moalem.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.